What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So yesterday, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth initial sales numbers were released, and they seem to have come in below expectations, which has brought up all kinds of questions as to why, and we're going to go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about that Princess Peach Showtime demo, as some data mining actually put out information that people are still confused as to why Nintendo doesn't release themselves. And then we're also be taking a look at this very odd bug that's going around right now for the PlayStation 5, as it appears to just eliminate your digital ownership for certain games. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early and ad-free. If you want to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with Unicorn Overlord, which actually is out today. And in fact, reviews went live yesterday, which we can see over on Metacritic, currently sitting at an 87. This is on the PlayStation 5. It's basically the same on the Switch, and it's not on an overwhelming number of reviews. I believe at the time of this recording, it's still under 20 reviews across different platforms total, but still, what's there is glowing. And this, of course, from Vanillaware being their latest outing. We can see with the split for reviewers, it's just 11 positive, 0 mixed, 0 negative, with Vandal at the top saying Unicorn Overlord is a really great game and essential for any lover of the tactical role that gets it right with its battles, with its elaborate system of formations and classes, with its great world map and its exquisite audiovisual section, something to which we must add that nostalgic and classic aroma that permeates the entire work. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Metro with an 80 saying a wonderfully weird console strategy game that's inspired by the past but forges its own very distinct legend with beautiful visuals and deep but accessible gameplay. So again, across the board, people seem pretty happy with Unicorn Overlord. It is out today, but there's also a demo that apparently it's quite lengthy. It's like 6 or 7 hours long, and your save data will transfer over. So if nothing else, you can try that out and see what you think. Also, there's an interesting video that went up a couple of days ago as it takes the Nintendo 64 and puts it into virtual reality with an Oculus headset. This is a video we can see here. This is released by James Lambert, who was the person who made that Portal 64 project, which was already super impressive. This, though, taking it to the next level, as they had fitted a USB and HDMI port to the system, and they were able to use the Oculus headset with it, which didn't go over the best. I mean, look, the N64 can only do so much, and they show it off in the video that it does kind of lag behind as you move around, and visually speaking, it's not exactly gonna fend off fend off motion sickness, I should say here, but it is one of those things of, could it do it? Yes, it could. Would you want to do it and actually play through a game that way? Probably not, but it's pretty cool to know that, yeah, the Nintendo 64 technically can do VR with an Oculus headset if you have the right tools and know-how, but I would check out the video so you can get a better idea of what they're looking at. Oh, and this was a fun surprise, as EA went into their back catalog and brought up a bunch of classic titles and just released them on Steam immediately. This was posted up over on X, saying 9 classic EA games are available to play on Steam starting today, and this is a pretty good list. One specifically caught my eye, but Command & Conquer: The Ultimate Collection, SimCity 3000, Unlimited Populous, Populous 2, Populous The Beginning, Dungeon Keeper Gold, Dungeon Keeper 2, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri Planetary Pack, and then The Saboteur, which is one I was curious about. That's interesting to see that all of a sudden drop back on Steam. I have not tried it on a Steam Deck or anything. I think that'd be kind of fun to revisit it there, but the fact that EA went into their back catalog and just said, yeah, why not? We'll just throw these on Steam. I'd like to see them do that actually a lot more, because they do have a vast library of titles in their back catalog they haven't done much with, so maybe this will become a trend for them going forward. We'll see. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as we did get some initial sales numbers out of Japan, and as I mentioned, they came in below expectations, which has started up a whole conversation as to what happened here. But first, let's take a look over on the sales charts. This is, of course, from Famitsu. Now, Rebirth did top the charts as expected for a new Final Fantasy game, but it coming in with 262,656 units. Now, at its face there, it's like, oh, well, that's actually pretty good. but we'll go back and compare it to some of the recent releases even. Below that, though, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, then Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Momotaro Densetsu World, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Shin-Chan, Goblin Slayer, Another Adventure, Splatoon 3, Matsurika, Nokai, and then Minecraft on the Switch. Moving over to the hardware, the Switch at the top, 62,531. That's actually up about 12,000 systems from last week. And below that, we do have the PS5, 48,067. That is a sizable jump at least, which you would expect, once again, Final Fantasy to work to push hardware. Not necessarily to the top of the charts, but still 15,000 or so jump from the previous week. There was at least movement there from Final Fantasy. Then we have the Xbox Series, 2,351, PS4, 1,722, then the 3DS actually moved up 3 units because they just happened to find more of them in the back. Now, I mentioned we would take a look at some previous entries for Final Fantasy in Japan, and over on Install Base Forum, Evil did post up a comparison here with Rebirth, then 16, which 16 is 336,000, which remember, 8 months ago or so, there were less PS5s in Japan than there are now, so that's, again, kind of head-scratching on that one. Final Fantasy VII Remake, that was on the PS4 when there were just more PS4 systems out there at that time. 702,000, Final Fantasy 15 was 716,000, and then you go all the way back to Final Fantasy 13 on the PS3, 1.5 million sold in that first week. And really, if you look at this comparison, it's, it is trending in the wrong direction, especially considering Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is probably one of the best Final Fantasies I've played in quite a while, and I'm 30 hours in now, right? So I've moved past the halfway point for the main story, and the story itself is very intriguing and it is pulling me forward, but even like the overall gameplay with the battle system, progression, the world itself is just really fun, and the further I get in, the more I look at it and go, okay, is this better than this Final Fantasy and this one? And I need to get to the point where I finish the game to really look back on it and do a full comparison, but I am kind of back now to the PS1 era with some of these comparisons. That's how good Rebirth is. So when I see it in this position, it is kind of odd. It's head-scratching to a degree. And there are a lot of reasons people are coming up with. For example, it's only a PS5 game. And yeah, sure, that will of course limit its overall reach, but so was Final Fantasy 16, and there were less PS5s in Japan at that time. So unfortunately, that kind of throws some of that reasoning out the window when you see 16 doing better. Again, 16 still kind of trending downwards from even Remake or 13 or 15, but you could at least say, okay, PS5 exclusive, I get it. The other thing that was brought up is, did Final Fantasy VII Remake and the direction they're taking it in as really just a reimagining, did that put some OG Final Fantasy VII fans off, as maybe they were going into it expecting to have a full-on remake, a one-to-one remake? That's possible. And then the other thought is, could Final Fantasy itself as a franchise be declining? I did kind of put that out there on Twitter just to get the conversation going, seeing what people thought about some of the sales figures that are getting out there, because I do wonder if the newer generation coming into gaming that are getting older, and they're, in their teens now and going to be 20, 21, 22 here in a few years to round out this generation, they don't have the same nostalgia for Final Fantasy's glory days like we do, where we look back on, as I mentioned, the PS1 days, you could say the PS2 days with 10 and 10-2, but like 12, those are quality Final Fantasy games. But then beyond that, are a lot of people out there going, Final Fantasy 13 was a classic. 15, don't even get me started. What an incredible experience. Not really. We usually have to go back like 20 years to find that quote-unquote classic Final Fantasy experience. So at least in Japan, I do think it is declining a bit, and Final Fantasy itself, I think, is becoming more and more Western focused, with kind of the gameplay changes being more action-oriented, but still, this isn't the right direction for Final Fantasy in terms of sales and just popularity, and it does make me wonder what Square thinks about all this. But these are only the Japan numbers. I do wonder if maybe in the West, for example, in the US, the MPD, it does incredibly well and kind of balances all of this out. But for now, these are the numbers we have to go on. So let me know what your thoughts are around Rebirth's initial sales numbers, because the game is really good, but it's not necessarily selling as well as basically everyone was expecting it to, at least, again, in Japan so far. Next up, let's talk about Princess Peach Showtime, as the demo is out. I had a chance to play a good bit of the demo. It's not incredibly long or anything, but I kind of have an idea as to what my thoughts are on this game at this time. But because the demo's out there, of course, people were able to data mine it, and they did gather some interesting information that I'm still surprised Nintendo doesn't just throw out there when they announce these titles. But to get started, Oatmeal Dome here does point out that the game is using Unreal Engine 4, specifically 4.27.2, which they believe might be the last version of Unreal Engine 4. And with the data mining, we can see Luigi Blood says the code name for it is PJ037, proves that it's actually made by Goodfeel. All of their games do have code names like this, and they point out things like Yoshi's Crafted World and Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, or just Epic Yarn, all that coming in with the same kind of code name setups. It's very weird that they don't include Goodfeel at all in their announcements, or apparently in like their copyright page. It's Nintendo, for some reason, is just not upfront with some of the other studios that are developing these games alongside of them. So it comes down to, yeah, you got to data mine it and get this information out of the code to figure out who is creating it. Very odd. But as for the demo itself, I mentioned I played a good portion of it, and I will say in handheld mode, kind of blurry. It's running at like 30 frames, all that, sure. But again, we know the Switch is into its 8th year now, so technical expectations aren't exactly high for it, but I do think some of the fun details with it being like on a stage at all times, they have like the spotlight on Peach and stuff, like those are really fun aesthetic and art decisions for it. But the game is definitely geared towards a younger general audience, as in it's not a very difficult game, and it also doesn't seem to be a very deep game in terms of any kind of progression or character mechanics, nothing like that. But I could see it being fun again for a younger audience, and I kind of feel like for me, maybe not the game that I'm looking forward to the most, we'll say, in March, especially on that day with Dragon's Dogma 2 and Ronin releasing next to it. Maybe at some point I'll get to it, but for now, I think the demo gave me enough of an idea as to what I'd be getting into. But hey, let me know what you thought of the demo down below. And the idea of Nintendo keeping something like just Goodfeel developing it pretty quiet and secretive to where we have to data mine it to figure it out. Next up, let's talk about a situation that, of course, is bringing up a lot of concerns around that all-digital future that we seem to reference here a lot, especially when things just go flat out wrong. And in this case, it seems like 50 or so people have experienced an error on their PS5 that just eliminated their digital ownership of their library. This is a weird one, but over on Reddit we can see this post, and this just says people are losing access to their digital licenses and people need to be talking about it. This was posted up by Suds a couple of days ago, and they do go in detail as to what's happening here, saying for the last few months there has been a bug impacting a relatively small amount of PSN users in which all digital licenses, including purchase games and titles added to one's library via PlayStation Plus, become decoupled from your transaction history, which shows you purchased those things. Now, the good news is they at least explain what they believe happened, so you can try to avoid this, saying that it does appear some degree of impact from the bug may be able to be mitigated. And that's the purpose of this PSA. The exact sequence of events that nuked my licenses was me trying to launch a game, that being Helldivers 2, getting an error message. So we have CE117736. Google told me to restore licenses, and doing that is what wiped me out. Now, here's the thing. Sony is aware of this, but they're being incredibly quiet, not really saying anything, but they are investigating, as people have made an entire thread over on the PlayStation Support subreddit, and they've even listed and linked to everyone's account of what happened, and their ticket that they send in for support. So this is something that has been growing, and I wanted to bring this up, obviously, because if you had your digital licenses erased from, let's say, yesterday and beyond, I mean, that could be your entirety of your PS3, your PS4, and your PS5 library gone. Potentially tens of thousands of dollars, maybe, with how expensive some of these games are getting, and then the add-ons for them. So if this happens to you, there does appear to be a large push for just gathering data around this so that Sony can work this out. But again, this comes back to that all-digital future and the fact that, yes, for ownership like this, you don't technically own it. You're leaving a lot in the hands of the publisher and the platform holder here, because this isn't just affecting Sony's first party, also third-party games that go through the PlayStation Store and are stored in your digital library on your PS4 and your PS5. So yeah, not great. And the fact that Sony isn't necessarily saying anything, I know they're looking at this like, okay, it's 50 people out of millions and millions who own a PlayStation 5 and then a PS4. How big of a deal do we have to make out of this? But again, you're losing like the entirety of your digital library up to a point, which would have been like a week ago for some. So that's a lot for Sony to not really be saying much. So here's hoping they're able to resolve this and get some kind of fix out there through an update or a firmware or something. But if you're having issues like this, I would head over to the subreddit, leave a comment with your account, and they'll actually add you in. And it seems like they're just getting everyone together to then present again to Sony to try to get them to say something. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Insomniac and Spider-Man 2, as they did push an update for the game that we were expecting with New Game Plus, but something else came along with it that they were not expecting, as they appear to have left access open for a debug menu or developer mode. And this was quickly noticed as people appeared to be accessing it at the title screen by hitting a combination of buttons. And there are many threads that at least explain how to get to this. But you can see, for example, this post up over on X. This was from Justin, who just asked, how do you mess up this badly? And they show images of a few of the menus here. And what's interesting is in some of these menus, there appears to be references to certain characters that will be part of downloadable content. Now, some of the DLC and missions were alluded to in those Insomniac hacks, but the fact that it's being found in the game here does kind of point to it actually being a thing, and maybe would be introduced here later on, maybe this year. So there's a certain character in there that I won't spoil, but you can technically go look up for yourself. However, what's really funny is some of these menus were being compared to old school cheat menus we would get by putting in a combination on a PS2 controller or something, and looking at it where you can essentially turn on like God mode for your character and not die, or have like infinite health or gadget refills, that sort of thing. It's pretty funny, all the editing you can do here, and that is exactly what I thought of when I first saw the menu. Insomniac is aware, though. They say here over on their official account, we're aware the latest game update may have inadvertently allowed access to a development game menu. There's a hotfix on the way. Please note that using this menu could corrupt your saves and trophy progress. There is no risk associated with playing the game as intended. So just be aware that if you do intend to go in there and mess around in this debug menu, you could indeed mess up your account for your trophy progress, which is, that's a big deal for a lot of people, or just your save game that maybe you're now to the point where you can break through the level cap with this update, and then all of a sudden it's just gone completely. But what a strange thing to see happen here, and there are plenty of people just messing around with the debug menu and looking through it. So one way or the other, we're probably gonna get a bunch of information coming out from that, and it's just once again Insomniac who can't catch a break, although this time it's kind of on them. And before we go to the comments of the day, we're gonna take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, are you picking up Princess Peach Showtime? Okay, 56% just not interested right out of the gate. 32% say later if there's a sale. 12% say yes, getting it ASAP. I do wonder if this is a game that March, especially when it comes out, the day it comes out, kind of crowded. Not necessarily on the Switch, but just in general with Dragon's Dogma 2, Rise of the Ronin, that sort of thing. But I look at this and go, okay, Nintendo clearly is designing this for a younger audience. And in the comments for the people who said they were getting it, were like, yeah, I think this could be a lot of fun to have and play with along with my kids, that sort of thing. But I also think that it could just end up being a fun 3D action kind of platformer, I guess. But I also look at it and go, yeah, it's probably not really a game that's targeted towards me necessarily. Maybe later on I'll double back when there's a bit more time, maybe a slower period in the year, and take a look at it again. And we'll finish up with the comments of the day. We'll start with this one here. This is posted up by Tyron, who says, talk about old, I played Red and Blue on the Cinder Block in the 4th grade. It is really funny that some of us are old enough to remember the transition from what was essentially black and white, or what, black and green monochrome, to color. That's a big deal, right? All of a sudden you have different colors on screen for your Game Boy. It was mind-blowing stuff. And then eventually the screen lit up with the Game Boy SP. You didn't need that worm arm or position the flashlight just right under the cover so you could see it in the middle of the night. Those were the days. Now it's like everything is completely backlit and you just choose your brightness between 1 and 100%. They don't know the struggle of trying to get the light just right on that Game Boy to make out what's happening on a ghosting green and black screen. And then we'll go over to a comment from the members video. We can see this post up by Ruckus saying, I feel like the idea of retro has more to do with significant leaps in technology and graphics. The N64 felt more retro compared to the GameCube than the PS3 does compared to the PS5. Yeah, that's also a really good point. The fact that we do have diminishing returns. Will the PS5 in 12 or 13 years, and it's like a 15 or 16 year system at that time, will that feel retro? Because I kind of think it won't necessarily, and that's just because it does 4K. Okay, it does 4K, right? But like it's able to put out a 4K image, and for many people that's good enough now, and probably will be good enough in 10 years or so. That's kind of the thing now. If you go back and look at the Nintendo 64, that feels very retro. The GameCube, the PS2, yeah, sure, that still feels retro, but like the PS3 and the 360 for many people doesn't necessarily feel retro, and that's because one of them has a Blu-ray player and both of them have HDMI ports for the most part. So you're absolutely right. The leaps in technology certainly play into the idea of what's retro and what's not, at least what feels retro. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Well, there's Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Some of the sales coming in a bit soft in Japan. Do you think the Western market will make up for some of those lower sales, or do you think there's just something else going on here, at least right now, with this specific title? And then also, what about Princess Peach Showtime? Did you try out the demo? What do you think about Good Feel actually developing this one? And then that bug for the PlayStation 5 with the digital library or ownership becoming detached from your account. Let me know if you're someone who actually has experienced this recently. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.